And so over to you, Scott. Thank you.
Hey, Andre, thanks for having me on here. Filling in for Matt White, who is going to be on here. Yeah, I'm going to hopefully answer some questions you guys have. We're going to talk a little bit about our capabilities, not necessarily as Evergreen Fire, but as firefighters in general, with regard to structure triage, meaning what would we do in the event of a wildland fire in a neighborhood? How would we triage homes to determine which homes we can spend time on to give them a best chance to survive a fire? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then I wanted to kind of tag on to what Dave started to talk a little bit about, was like what you can do. And I think there was a question like what are our next steps, or what can we do immediately to kind of mitigate our risk? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Firewise has a pretty solid checklist for treating your structure, what we call structural hardening, in that home ignition zone. That home ignition zone being your home, your structure, and that first 5 feet. And so I'll kind of hit on those two things. And if you guys have questions, other questions as well, I'd be happy to try to answer those. And we'll get going. And Andre, if I leave anything out that you had mentioned, just feel free to interject and remind me. So we'll go from there. So again, on this idea of the WUI and the wildland urban interface, we all, I think it's probably safe to say we all live in it. I mean, the WUI is getting bigger, as you know, as was mentioned with the Marshall Fire. Those people, the homeowners there probably did not think that they were in the wildland urban interface, but turns out they were. And so with grass, fine flashy fuels, fire can move rapidly and move to places where it hasn't been in a long time. And with the accumulation of deadened down and woody material on the ground that has not been consumed by fire like it would have been a long time ago, that tends to accumulate and our risk becomes larger as time goes on. So again, this WUI idea, it's getting bigger. I would venture to say that some of Denver is in the WUI. If you think about that, if a fire starts in a grassland, say in a park, and moves into a neighborhood or subdivision, and then it becomes an urban conflagration, structure to structure, that becomes, it's a wildland fire, but then it becomes structure fires pretty rapidly. So it's good that we're all talking about this, and it's a huge endeavor to try to mitigate our risk. But we're all on the right track, and everyone coordinating like this is a phenomenal thing to see everyone on here chipping away at this in different communities, different neighborhoods, and different means. So I'll get on to it. Like I mentioned, the first thing I want to talk about is the idea of structure triage and what we as firefighters look at when we're determining which houses are worth our time saving. It comes down to it's utilitarian. It's utilitarian because we only have minutes to spend on homes, at most maybe 20 to 25 minutes on a house before we either have to move on or we determine that we'll stay there if that home is truly defensible. And so there are two categories that are in this that we look at. We try to determine which category the house falls into, one being defensible and one being non-defensible. And defensible is, if a home is defensible, that means that there is a safety zone close by. And that is a pretty tall order, because a safety zone, as you guys probably know, is a very large area that requires very little prep to be able to survive if a fire front were to come through and not be affected. So most of the homes, I would say, at least in Evergreen, most of our homes, if not all of them, do not technically fall into that category of defensible. Realistically, however, there are many, many homes that are defensible as far as our comfort zone. What are we comfortable with? What level of risk as firefighters are we comfortable kind of taking on to be able to defend a home? And so I don't want you guys to think that no homes are defensible, but technically a home that's defensible has to have a safety zone, and realistically, those don't exist. But how you make your home more likely to survive fire, that plays directly into whether or not a crew of firefighters is comfortable staying there and spending time on that house. And so we'll kind of get right into that. The things that we look at are to determine whether or not a home is defensible, again, within our comfort zone. So we're gonna discard that idea of a safety zone for right now, because we're not. I mean, like I said, in Evergreen, almost no house sits in a safety zone. So it's not like we're not going to go defend houses. We're going to do our work, do the best work we can with what we have. And so we look at what we call tactical challenges and hazards. And so those things are like narrow roads, whether a home or a structure is in a drainage, close proximity to heavily forested fuel model, or one way in, one way out, a long driveway that we can't turn around in to be able to leave driving forward out. Trying to think what else we have. So defensible space is another one. And this plays directly into this little discussion here. And that's probably the one of the biggest ones is if someone has done defensible space and has implemented structural hardening techniques, then that immediately decreases that level of concern for the firefighters in that area for their safety. And it'll be readily obvious if that defensible space has been done, or if that house is if that house is in a field with very few trees around it, then that they can work with that really easily. And that person who owns that home may not have done defensible space, but they just have defensible space because of where that house is in that field. Any questions so far on that? Nope. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're talking about individual houses, but what about how would you assess a whole neighborhood that only has one road in and the same road out? Would you would that impact whether you would even come to that neighborhood?
It would depend. That's a very good question. And it would depend on the proximity of fuel along that one way in, one way out road. And it would depend on the fuel loading and houses, or if the houses are in close proximity to dense forest up in that neighborhood. And so we have a neighborhood up here in Evergreen called Echo Hills, and they're at the top of a ridge with a one way in, one way out, and heavily wooded on both downhill sides. And so that's where that idea of defensible space comes in. And so it depends on, like, is there already fire in the neighborhood? Has a fire front already gone through? It depends on those things, but we'd be able to make a determination on if we think it's safe and it's safe to go in there. And then we would probably go in there and do a quick triage of the structures, and we would patrol it and patrol that neighborhood for any immediate risks to homes. So if there's a deck that has been that has ignited, or if there's furniture on a deck or furniture on a in close proximity to the house, or I mean, there's a story of I forget which fire it was, but there was a broom that was leaning up against this house, and the house was fine. A fire front had come through, and the crew that was patrolling that area, they saw this broom, and the bottom of the broom was on fire, and the fire was creeping up the handle of the broom, and it was laying on this wood-sided house. And so I don't know if that house would have burned or not if that fire had contacted it, but that crew just pulled that broom away, and they potentially saved that house. So we would probably patrol that area and do a rapid assessment for homes that have done defensible space, or that homes that are in a field or something that has low fuel density. And we would make that we call that our, like, not technically a safety zone, but that's our shelter zone right there. And we would dedicate time to that area depending on how many homes had were in that kind of category of defensible, meaning they did some defensible space, or they're in a field, something that we can work with. So we wouldn't just write it off because it's a one way in, one way out. With maps and some local, we call it intel or intelligence, like maps, and we call them pre-plans, we would be able to make that determination before going into there and go from there. So it's not like an all or nothing. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yes, that helps. Thank you.
Okay.
It's Scott. This is Andre.
Yes.
And with that, that's, I think, one of the reasons we encourage a get together with the neighborhood, with the firefighters like yourself, to have that very perspective. And it's very specific to that neighborhood. So doing a ride along, or some sort of tour through the neighborhood to talk about that, we call it the evacuation area, but it's actually ingress for you coming into the neighborhood. So if you can come in together and talk about the specific hazards where you're most concerned about, and then maybe some potential areas that you're talking about, your safety zone that you could create along the way, that the neighborhood could work on to build a little bit more confidence with you coming into the neighborhood, then you could talk to your fellow firefighters and say, hey, we've worked on this. This road is the best road to come in, and there's a safety zone in this particular area. I think, that partnership between the neighborhood and you, having that direct communication, can help alleviate some of those concerns and give more confidence to the professionals that are coming in to have to fight that fire.
Absolutely. That kind of like you said, collaboration. You got to build that trust somehow, right? And collaborating beforehand and developing that cohesion, that is key. Absolutely. And we're trying to do that here as best we can. The caveat is if there's a large fire, there are going to be a lot of resources on that fire. And the majority of those firefighters will not have that immediate local knowledge, or will not have that relationship with those people to know exactly where everything is, or know which houses specifically are mitigated, or where specifically these, we'll call them temporary or areas of refuge. I don't really want to call them safety zones. If there is a safety zone, they'll be able to determine that, but where they'll feel safe. And so that is where the key importance is of defensible space, because we can't count on the firefighters coming in knowing ahead of time that this house is mitigated or this one isn't. And so what we call it's a drive-by assessment or drive-by triage, and we're going to do a quick assessment. And I say the standard is the same for all wildland firefighters. We have this little pocket guide. It's our incident response pocket guide. We call it our IRPG. And in this little booklet, it's kind of a quick. I mean, it's not it's not tiny. It's over a 1/2 inch thick and 3 by 5. There's a whole ton of information here, but this is our standard across the nation, and I think internationally as well in Canada, for how we do fire operations. And everyone's using this. And so we have our standard that is cross-jurisdictional, cross-agency, that's the same. And that allows us to make those quick assessments. We all do the same assessments. And if we're in that structure triage role, then that's what we're going to do. And so that's like the bottom line, if that makes sense. So all wildland firefighters operate on from this little pocket guide. And that's where that structure triage comes in, that rapid assessment of, hey, is this what we call it is stay and play. In other words, we're going to stay here and do some work because we think it's worth it, or this house isn't survivable. No matter what we do, it's not going to affect it or help it with that amount of time, say 20 to 25 minutes that we have to work on that house. So we want to make sure that we give firefighters, and I say we because I'm in the same boat. I live in the WUI. I live just up the road in one of the most heavily fueled drainages in Evergreen. And I do work at my house because if there's a fire here, I'm not going to be home. I'm going to be out doing the fire stuff. And whatever crew is doing structure triage, it may be me or my crew, but it may not be. And I want to give the crew that comes through my neighborhood, I want to present them with through their eyes, something that's attractive that they'll feel safe at. And that goes back to that defensible space, because we can't rely on that pre-existing relationship with a local fire department, because the crew may not be local. But it may be us, it may be someone, like, honestly, it may be a crew from Australia, because the US and Australia have a good working relationship to send resources back and forth. And so a crew that's completely unfamiliar with the area from the start, they'll get intel and they'll get some situational awareness, but they won't have that relationship with the local community members. And so we want to create a kind of objective, we want to present our houses as a comfortable place for firefighters to do work. And how we do that is through defensible space and structural hardening. Does that I don't want to like monologue on here about that, but I want to make sure we hit both of those points of, one, it's my responsibility to develop relationships with our local community members and do those drive-throughs and use those to the best of our ability. But we also have to understand and acknowledge that may not be available if there's a fire. And so we want to present the firefighters with a best case scenario for them to say, hey, I feel good about defending this house. And like I said before, doing the defensible space, whether it's Firewise, Ready, Set, Go, or Colorado State Forest Service guidelines. Colorado State Forest Service guidelines are kind of the epitome of like the highest standard for defensible space. That's what we use. I think that's what most defensible space recommendations are based off of, at least in Colorado. But any of those are good, and that's how we present useful. I don't know about useful, but an attractive home. And I don't mean attractive home, but an attractive environment for firefighters to feel comfortable doing work and staying and playing and treating that structure, doing the last little bit of work, maybe pulling off, raking out some pine needles that someone left. So that's my soapbox for defensible space there. Any questions on that?
Just to follow up on the rapid triage concept, Scott, and I've heard different answers, but I'd like to hear your perspective on the actual amount of time. Like, say you're driving down the street and you're going by a house, factoring in all, of course, your experience with that. But from your perspective, how long are you going to do that assessment before you make a decision?
So it's it's pretty rapid. It's seconds. It's so based on that, the firefighter's experience, and usually it'll be the most senior, the senior member of that squad or crew, usually an officer who has a significant amount of experience that he can rely on, kind of those slides that he can kind of review in his head and say, oh, I know this, I know that house is good, this house is not. And so it's literally an actual drive-by or a drive-through, and they're gonna be looking at homes and making the rapid assessment is literally seconds, a quick visual assessment of that house. And if they can't see the back of the house, then they're going to stop and get some eyes on the back of the house. But for the firefighters going through the area, it'll be quick, and they'll make a rapid decision on literally seconds decision on whether or not they can, it's worth further investigation or this one or not. And so whether it's defensible or non-defensible.
I think it's important for folks to hear that, in that it's happening in seconds. So if you're not seeing that and making it presentable to start off with, then you're at a disadvantage, on whether or not your house is going to be deemed safe enough for folks to go in. I'd like to mention you guys are, there's risk that you're willing to accept, but not sacrifice.
Right, right.
We have a question from Lorraine Myers, and it's how are parked vehicles assessed for firefighter safety aside from being in the way?
How are parked vehicles assessed for safety? Do you mean in terms of them combusting and contributing to the fuel, or?
Yes,
okay,
she says
so.
Yes.
Yeah, and again, we treat it like another type of fuel, and it's not a good type of fuel. It's much worse than wood fuel. And so again, if cars are not already involved, meaning if they're not already on fire, we don't generally go through the neighborhood with heavy equipment, and so we don't have a capability to move them if they're unlocked. We may, if the windows are down, we may try to roll them up, but that's kind of an afterthought. If a car is parked, I guess let's set a kind of a quick little example here. If there's a car that's parked underneath, let's say a parking structure that's connected to a house that's wood, and that car, and there's like pine needles or wood next to that car, we'll probably stop and move that combustible material out of the way and try to pull all the combustible material out from underneath that car to give that car the best chance of survival. Because if that car burns, that's underneath that parking, that overhang that's connected to the house, then the house is going to go. And so we'll take all that into account. But as far as cars on the roadside, that's kind of an afterthought. Again, if that car is already on fire, it's gone, and we're going to try to keep it from burning other material. But again, it's kind of an afterthought. Does that answer your question, Lorraine?
She says thanks. Yes.
Okay.
There's another question. It's from Adam Rogers, and I have totally mitigated house with 30-foot excavated radius round. However, we have a long S-shaped driveway, and my neighbor has a 12-acre unmitigated forest. Are we in trouble?
I wouldn't say you're in trouble, but I wouldn't say you're in the clear either. Again, this goes back to I think Dave hit it well when he said, if I just do my house, it's not going to matter if no one else does the house around us. And I'll go into your question a little more specifically regarding your house, Adam. But all of the defensible space recommendations are based on data that we have that look at individual homes, not like a neighborhood. I mean, if an entire neighborhood burns, then the investigators will look at that and try to determine why those homes burned. But for example, the FireWise checklist, I'm a strong proponent of that. And I'll share my screen in a bit and show you guys that if you're not familiar with that checklist. That checklist is an assimilation of thousands of homes that have burned as well as homes that have survived. And they looked at reasons why the homes burned, and then they also looked at reasons why homes survived in those same fires. And they came up with this checklist, and it's specifically about the structure. So this checklist is not about defensible space, it's only about the structure. And so again, going back to that idea of if you do defensible space and treat your structure, even if you have an entire forest of unmitigated forest around your home is going to be significantly more likely to survive. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are right now, but I think 5 years ago, the Missoula Fire Lab determined that if you treat your structure, this is just looking at the structural hardening techniques, so like keeping your gutters clear, raking out pine needles away from your house, not storing flammable material on your deck, those types of things, then those homes had something like a 90, I think at the time it was like 96% rate of survival, regardless of the fire, as long as direct flame contact did not hit the house. And so even if you have a really bad, gnarly forested area around your house, and if your neighbors don't do anything, you're gonna benefit from doing the structural hardening techniques to your house and that 5 foot zone, what we call a non-combustible zone, and then that 30 foot, and then reducing larger fuel out to 100 feet. But Adam, specifically to your question, I think there are kind of a couple things. So I think we kind of hit on the neighbor part of it, but that your long S-shaped driveway, and I wanted to touch on this at some point, but if you have a long driveway, or if you can't see your house from the road and your house is mitigated, there are a lot of homes in Evergreen that you can't see from the road, and they do have a long driveway, but the home is effectively in a safety zone because they've clear cut 100 feet around the house. That home's good. And the caveat is, if there's a crew that is unfamiliar with that specific house that is going through, then they may not know that, and they may not look at, they may look at your driveway and be like, oh, we can't do that. Or if there's fire really, really close, they probably won't go up that driveway to reconnoiter or like do some recon. If there isn't fire really close, they may go up, they may send a person walking up, and they'll look at what's beyond at the end of that driveway to determine if they can go in there and do some work. And if they do see a well mitigated house with a solid first 30 foot zone, and then fuel reduction further out from that, larger fuels, then they'll probably go in there and do a quick check. And what we call that house specifically, if that house is, if they've done that structural hardening and defensible space well, we call that standalone. And so that's where, that's best case scenario. So that crew would determine then, hey, this house is pretty solid. And so we're not going to spend much time on it right now, but we're going to come back around to it in the next hour or so and make sure that everything's still good. And then they'll keep that house in mind as a potential safety zone for them, where they know that they can go back to that house and be safe without having to deploy fire shelters. Adam, does that answer your question?
That's perfect. Thanks. You actually did a drive-through with my wife last year. And it's
okay.
So
okay. I don't remember that specifically, but yeah. So you guys have done that 30 foot in the last year or so, or?
Yeah, we actually excavated, so it's flat now. It's pretty cool.
Nice.
But what concerns us is the neighbor doesn't live there. There's no structure, and she has tens of thousands of dead and down trees. I'm not even exaggerating.
Yeah. Okay. So,
yeah.
Adam, I'm gonna put my email up in the chat here. If you want to email me, I'd be happy to come back out and take another look at it and just give you guys some get some eyes on what you're talking about.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Adam, I'm not sure if you have contact with that, with that person who owns the property. Do you have any way of getting in touch with them?
Yeah, I think I mentioned before she threatened to sue me.
Oh,
Yeah.
how about that?
So yeah, we have contact, but she doesn't like me. Yeah, so it's complicated.
Yeah, and I know there's some unique ideas that are out there, and one of the ones that we ran across was actually another ministry that we actually kind of mentored us when we got started. They actually took a concept where they actually went out and limbed and bucked those down trees and did some splitting, and they offered those trees to basically offered firewood to people who could use to help. They were financially strapped. So if you're able to do that, and if there's an effort in the community that could take some of that, that would at least help with some of reducing some of that dead fuel in the area. I know it's a lot. 12 acres is a lot, but at least you can start looking at it from some of those perspectives.
We've done that on our property. We've offered for her, but yeah, we've talked about this before. She's some old lady, lives in Denver, and it's some legacy land from 100 years ago.
Okay.
It's literally worthless, and it's right up against my yard, and it's a problem. So,
all right. Well, thank you for that question. That's a great question, and we encounter a lot of unique situations. Well, actually, this is fairly common here, so I appreciate that perspective. We have about 10 minutes left. Scott, are there any other perspectives that you would like to mention that we were not able to discuss so far?
I don't think so. I think we kind of hit on everything. Is there anyone who is not familiar with the Firewise checklist?
Is which checklist? Is that the one from the state, or is it who makes the checklist? Just out of curiosity.
It's from Firewise. Let me. Can I share my screen?
I think you can. I apologize if I have some issues. I'll stop sharing mine and then let you share yours.
All right. So do you guys see this? The home ignition zone checklist?
Yep, can see it.
If you guys have not seen this before, it's available online. So what I did, this is actually part of a little trifold pamphlet that Firewise produces. Really good information. But this is the key. This stuff right here is what saves homes from what we call ember wash. And so most homes, I'll keep it quick here. Most homes don't burn from direct flame contact. They burn from embers kind of penetrating into that house, smoldering for hours, maybe days, and then that home burns from the inside out. That's how most homes burn. And so again, the defensible space and structural hardening. This is what I mean by structural hardening. These 8 items right here. It's kind of a 2-punch protection system. One, the home ignition zone checklist is how you protect your home from embers. And then the defensible space, that 30-foot or that 0 to 5, and then 30 foot, and then 100. That's how you protect your home from the actual direct flame contact, like big flames. And so, what I like to make sure that people keep in mind is when they frame their kind of perspective on fire mitigation, we want to work from the house out. We want to work from lowest cost to larger cost, most effective to I should say not most effective, most bang for your buck. And all these items right here, these don't really cost a lot of money. I mean, the first one, clean roof and gutters of dead leaves and debris and pine needles that could catch embers. That is a huge thing right there. That probably doesn't cost you anything. You might have to pay someone to come do that, but it does not nearly cost as much as dropping a 20-inch ponderosa like that to drop a tree. I don't know what contractors might charge for that, but for one tree, it could be $1,200. So in dropping that ponderosa may not help your home if you don't do these items on your structure. So I want to make sure that everyone has access to this, and the easiest way to access it is just look up, do a Google image search for home ignition zone checklist, and this will be one of the images that pop up. Andre, I can also email this to you if you want to send it out to everyone. I can do that too, so that people have it. If you've already seen this and you're already very familiar with it, then you're going to get it again.
Yeah, we're always happy to share any resources that are out there. Just for your perspective, we went over the National Volunteer Fire Council's wildfire assessment program checklist in both the looking at the vegetation and then also the home structure. But I know sometimes people are looking for just a short, quick checklist to be able to go over stuff, and this is fantastic. So, you know, we'll share that out. Happy to do that here. So if you want to send it to me, please do so, and I'll include it in the materials that we send out to everybody after the session.
Okay, perfect. Does anybody want this up any further? I'll stop sharing it.
And we're recording it too, so we'll send out the recording to everyone so they can have it here.
Perfect.
So these are great perspectives here. I think it's really important for everyone to hear those aspects and then bring in that to your neighborhoods as well, so then you can apply it. And more like Dave was talking about earlier, you just take it from the positive perspective. If you take their advice on what they're providing you, that gives them the confidence that they can come in and save homes that you know, maybe it may have been marginal. And so if you make it more conducive for them to come into the neighborhood, they're going to come in and do it. I mean, these guys are professionals, and they really want to do it and save the neighborhoods. That, you know, like Scott mentioned, it's his neighborhood too. They live in that community, and they want to save it as well. So great perspectives. I forgot to ask one, Scott, the second item you mentioned here in your structural triage, it was tactical hazards, and there was one other thing that I forgot that I didn't write down, but can you mention that again?
We call them tactical challenges and hazards.
Tactical, okay. Okay, all right. Yeah, that's a new one I haven't heard before. I've heard it in different forms, but I really like that it's very concise, and it makes complete sense here, and it's great to hear it presented that way as well. So I'll try to keep that in mind as I go forward with it and doing this type of work. Any other questions from folks that they've not been able to ask so far? Please, this is your time to ask. Okay, that looks like that's it. I want to say thank you to both of our presenters today. Fantastic information. Really appreciate your perspectives, your information, and your knowledge. They're bringing many years of experience to this discussion, so I really appreciate it. I also would like to say that a special thanks to our friend Dave Root, as he comes to the end of a great career, and he's always been a phenomenal partner to us and to, of course, our neighborhood. But, you know, our group has been we started from a very small fledgling group. We're still small, but Dave has always given us great amount of time along the way, given us great mentorship. And we so appreciate all the things that he has done to help make us smarter about this business. And we're not professionals in it. And Dave's been fantastic to us. So I want to say thank you, Dave, for your service to our area. And we wish you a great retirement and that you actually enjoy it. If you want to come out and play, we're, of course, you're more than welcome to come out and play with us. But I really appreciate your professionalism and your partnership with us. And then Scott, thank you so much for coming on at the last minute here. And that was great information. We look to continued partnership with the Evergreen crew up there. I think it grows stronger every year, and I certainly would love to come out and meet you guys and have a discussion with you along the way. A lot of challenges there, but you got a great group of folks that really want to help out there.
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks for the opportunity to, like, I love discussing this stuff, and it's good to see. And we got like 20 people on here, and I mean, it's always great having these conversations because you never know what that key little piece of information is for someone to say, oh, all right, that makes sense. Or the piece of the puzzle that clicks.
absolutely, and we hold these folks are force multipliers out there and gather in their neighborhoods together. So then the 20 turns into, you know, many more. So so we're at our time tonight. So I don't want to keep anyone any longer, but want to say thank you to everyone once again for your time, and then we'll see you once again next week at the same time, 6 o'clock. Have a great night, and we'll hope to see you next week.